It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. So this week, I am going to talk about the 1959 movie, The Giant Gila Monster. Now, most people might think that this is a Roger Corman film, but it actually isn't. It's actually co-produced by Ken Curtis. Curtis is best known for playing Festus on Gunsmoke, and before being an actor, he was with the Tommy Dorsey Band, and he was when he transitioned to be an actor, he mixed a singing career with acting for a little bit. And while he was acting and while he was on Gunsmoke, he did try his hand at producing some films. He produced 3 movies in the late 50s and early 60s. There was this movie and The Killershrews, and he co-starred as kind of the a villainous character in The Killershrews. But both this and Giant Gila Monster premiered together as a twin bill in June of 1959. And there's a little bit of a difference between the two movies. The Killershrews is a movie about adults dealing with monsters, whereas the Giant Gila Monster here is mostly made up of characters in high school or very young adults. And also, these are both very, very, very much to their core drive-in movies. These are movies made for teenagers and young adults to go with their dates and go with their pals and go watch a twin bill. Both of them, I think, I know this movie in particular is 75 minutes. I don't think Killershrews is any longer than that. So, they have a very similar vibe to them, being giant versions of normal creatures, but totally made for the younger crowd, totally made for drive-in type of fare. And this movie starts with a young couple who has kind of parked their car, I'm guessing so that they can have a little bit of necking going on there. And we find out that that these characters, and they actually become quite central figures. But the guy likes a girl who I think lives kind of more like on a farm, or at least lives on the other side of the tracks, if you know what I mean. And the guy is kind of from a little bit more powerful family in this small Texas town. And so they're already kind of, sneaking off, and everybody knows that they really like each other and that they really want to elope because the guy's dad doesn't really approve of the girl's family and so on and so forth. But there's more reason why they become central characters, because the Giant Gila Monster attacks and knocks their car off the road and down a cliff and kills them. So the missing teens then are really, for about 3/4 of this movie, it's a mystery what happened to them. People still think that they are, that they've gone off and eloped, and they don't really realize that there's a monster kind of messing with people just outside of this town on the highway. Now, a group of high school friends of that couple are assisting the sheriff and trying to figure out what happened to them, because the sheriff is getting pressure from the guy's dad, who's that powerful person in town. And, he's really kind of got his back against the wall to try to figure out, okay, well, what happened to the kids and so on and so forth. Now, the main kid that helps out with the sheriff is named Chase, and he's played by Don Sullivan. And I've got a little bit more about Don Sullivan here in just a little bit. But he kind of runs this garage where he fixes up cars. He soups them up as well. He also has a towing company out of the garage that he just whatever he can do to make a little extra money. So he's trying to figure out with the sheriff what happened and what's causing all these additional wrecked cars to kind of start showing up on the side of the highway. A drunk later gets helped out by Chase and claims that he got ran off by something, but it just kind of comes across, because the guy is drunk, that he's talking about like seeing pink elephants and stuff like that. So Chase doesn't really pay much attention to it. That guy ends up being a radio personality that all the kids know in Texas, and ends up, as a kind of a side story, ends up helping Chase record some records of some songs that he writes and sings and so forth. But really, there's kind of a dark element to this movie. I mean, these young kids or young adults are searching for friends that they don't know yet are dead. And it kind of adds a little bit of an interesting element to this movie because I kind of just end up feeling bad for these people because they don't realize that their friends are already dead. Now, what was originally just cars and things being found on the side of the road turns into something that involves people being directly attacked, or and they're living to tell about it, and so on and so forth. So now all these strange occurrences are starting to get a little bit more notice, and the pressure's on the sheriff a little bit more to find out what happened to that couple at the beginning. It soon found out or figured out that this is probably a giant lizard that's causing all the problems. And there is a little bit of an explanation. I'll talk about that here in just a moment. But it ends up attacking a sock hop where all the town's kids are hanging out. And Chase figures out and remembers that somebody had brought a couple of cans of nitroglycerin. And he stored it in the garage so that it wouldn't get upset or anything like that. So he goes to the garage with his girlfriend, and they pick up the nitroglycerin. He rigs up his hot rod with it, and then makes it so that the car runs into the giant Gila monster, and up it goes with a big boom. But let's get to my 3 things that I like about this. And, I wanted to kind of also say that this is a pretty easy watch. This movie does not speed through at 75 minutes, but that's not to say that it's not necessarily uninteresting or boring. And we'll get a little bit to that here when I get into my second why it doesn't turn out to be very boring, even though it doesn't really speed through its pacing. But it's just kind of an easy breezy little movie. But the first thing that I like about it is that there's really not much of an explanation where the giant Gila monster comes from. It's mentioned that the sheriff goes and talks to a biologist or somebody that's an expert on these types of things, and it's said that a change in diet and a change in the chemicals within a diet might affect creatures' pituitary glands in different ways. And so sometimes a monster, or a creature rather, is normal size and everything, and he starts eating something else, and then he becomes monster sized, which is bizarre because you would think that it would happen much more often. But they also tie in the story about some Russian kid or Ukrainian kid that was born, and 10 months later he was like weighing 120 pounds or 140 pounds or something like that, and he was already taller than his mother because of stuff that they were eating that got into the food supply in the area. So they figure that that's basically what's happening. Is just that this is a regular Gila monster that just has a bad case of gigantism that was brought on by a change in its diet. But there is something fun about watching a regular size creature kind of rampaging through little models when they're filming those types of scenes. And I also like that no one really knows that there's a giant lizard out there. And this is a time before it got harder and harder to quote unquote live off the grid, right? So even in this middle of nowhere town in Texas, there are still enough of nothing around the town to where a giant lizard might live without ever being really noticed, because it's just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And actually one of the characters even mentions that there's a big patch of nothing next to the town that there could be all sorts of things living out there that we never knew was out there until it got to the town. But there's all sorts of, weird things that happen, like I was saying, with wrecked cars, unclaimed suitcases left on the side of the road, etc. So there is a bit of a mystery here, and I do kind of like how they play with that, where, the monster strikes and then it retreats. And then the next day, people see that there's a car on the side of the road. So they don't really know that it's happening. And it's, that kind of adds a little bit of nice, you're waiting for the characters to figure it out and figure out what's going on. But then, the creature then starts wrecking things. Like there's a train coming into town, and it goes over a bridge, and the monster wrecks the bridge. And of course, all of it's done with models and everything, and it's adorable watching a regular sized lizard just kind of playing havoc with the models and stuff. But it's the survivors from that wreck and the town drunk that helps them figure out that there's an actual monster there. But it's still, it's a lot of fun watching the monster kind of scoot along with these little fake bushes and little fake trees next to it and stuff like that. It's just it's an adorable sort of thing and very, very charming for that era. Second, there are really, really likable characters in this movie. This seems like a movie that would use like kind of the squeaky clean teenager trope, but they aren't entirely annoyingly clean and like, gee willikers and gosh golly. The characters they're coupled and they're treated like husband and wife. So like you could very easily remake this movie with almost the exact same script with just changing a few little things here and make all of these people married couples, and it would still work because these are characters that are, kind of contributing to this small town. So, like they're a legitimate part of this community, and they're not being hassled by authority because they're just goofing off or they're loitering or anything. They're all like a member of the society, and they're treated like adults, even though they're kids. And so I find that kind of interesting too, because they're not exactly squeaky clean, because Chase has his foreign exchange student girlfriend Lisa, and he's talking about like making sure that she can stay in the United States, and like he's already talking about marrying her and having her stay and being his wife and the mother of his children and all of this. And that whole element of those missing kids at the beginning was that because they really wanted to be together, and they were considering like throwing away the guy's parents' power to elope and stuff like that. So it's like they're squeaky clean, but you kind of get the impression that they're playing a little bit of grab ass in the back seat of the car on the country road too. So that's kind of interesting. Also our main character Chase, he's caring for a little sister who needs these braces to walk. So he hustles pretty hard with his mechanic's job to help with expenses. So he's already kind of grown up at that point. And speaking of Don Sullivan, who plays Chase, he only appeared on TV and in movies from 56 to 62. However, he did return 50 years later when Jim Wynorski remade this movie as a made-for-TV movie called Gila. And however, when he left acting in 62, he did have a chemistry degree from the University of Idaho before going into acting. And so he used that to become one of the top creative cosmetic chemists in the hair industry. So that's kind of a fascinating thing. He just passed away, I think, in 2018 or something like that. He was like 89 years old at the time. So he had a pretty full and pretty successful life. Thirdly, this gets pointed out by others, but there is this nice little local and regional feel to the movie. Starting with the drive-in craze, movies began getting made regionally. And this was common in places like the South, where maybe some bigger Hollywood movies wouldn't necessarily appeal to the people who lived in the area. And you can probably guess what I mean by that, considering starting in the 60s, you would have actors like Sidney Poitier, and certainly in the 70s when you would have movies like like the blaxploitation movies, that wasn't going to fly very, very easily in the South. So they started making their own movies, and this movie kind of has that feel to it in an early stage. It feels very, very small town Texas. And because it, has that localized or regional feel, it helps fill out the cast with these various interesting characters. And like there are multiple drunks in this movie, and it's kind of funny that Chase just waits for somebody to get liquored up at the bar and run their car off the road so that he can go and collect the money from them to tow them back onto the road and send them on their way. It's kind of that small town, oh, that's Charlie, he's just drinking again or whatever feel to it. And of course the sock hop being the big social gathering for the town also serves as the best possible place for the climax to occur, which really kind of extends that small town regional feel. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on FilmSeizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. Additionally, hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday. So, until next week, stay spooky.